In the most recent season on record, England's Premier League generated more revenue than it ever had in its history, and its clubs collectively lost more money than they ever had too. A combined pre-tax loss approaching £1 billion, nearly 7 times worse than the year before. Now zoom out from England. In Brazil, 8 of the country's top 12 clubs were behind on salary payments entirely just a few years ago, with the government itself becoming the club's single largest creditor at over $1 billion in unpaid taxes. In Italy, Serie A clubs have posted aggregate losses for the better part of 2 decades, propped up by accounting maneuvers regulators have since ruled fraudulent at more than one major club. In Spain, some of the most valuable clubs on earth are legally barred from ever being bought outright, no matter how much debt they carry. And in the United States, Major League Soccer solved this entire problem before it could even start by making sure no individual club could ever technically go bankrupt in the first place. 5 completely different countries, 5 completely different ownership systems, legal structures, and cultures. And in every single one, the same strange pattern repeats. Clubs lose staggering amounts of money year after year and functionally never disappear. This is not a video about which league has the best football. This is a video about the 5 different, deliberately engineered mechanisms that let football clubs across the entire planet lose money in ways that would bankrupt almost any other kind of business, and keep existing anyway. Consider how unusual it is that 5 countries with almost nothing else in common, different legal systems, different levels of state involvement in commerce, and different cultural relationships to sport, all independently arrived at some version of the exact same outcome. That's not 5 coincidences. That's a signal that something about the fundamental nature of a football club as an asset pushes every system that tries to commercialize it toward the same destination, an enterprise that behaves nothing like a normal company when it comes to losing money. To understand how 5 different countries independently arrived at the same result, you have to look at each system separately. Because the trick isn't the same trick everywhere. Football clubs across most of the world began as community institutions rather than commercial enterprises, founded by churches, factories, and civic groups, existing to represent a town rather than to generate a financial return. That founding structure still shapes how losses get absorbed today, even as each major footballing nation built a different mechanism on top of it. In England, the trigger was the Premier League's 1992 breakaway to negotiate broadcast rights independently, which transformed football's economics almost overnight and attracted, over the following 2 decades, a new class of owner, sovereign wealth funds, and individual billionaires drawn to Chelsea, Manchester City, and beyond by prestige rather than dividends, willing to personally cover losses that would end a conventional business within a few years. In Spain, the mechanism runs even deeper, baked directly into corporate law. Real Madrid, Barcelona, Athletic Bilbao, and Osasuna are legally structured as member-owned associations called Socios, meaning no outside investor, however wealthy, can simply buy the club outright. This sounds like it should produce more financial discipline, and in some ways it does. La Liga has one of the strictest salary cap and spending control systems in world football. But it also means a club like Barcelona can accumulate well over €1 billion in debt, as it has, and never face the threat of an outside takeover that would force painful restructuring, because there's no external buyer to force it. Only the membership itself, voting every few years, with every incentive to keep the institution alive, regardless of the balance sheet. In Italy, the pattern took a darker turn. Serie A clubs have posted aggregate financial losses for most of the past 2 decades, and in 2023, Juventus was hit with a 10-point deduction after Italian football authorities found the club had used fabricated capital gains on player transfers between clubs to artificially inflate its accounts and disguise its true financial position. A scandal that revealed just how far a major club was willing to go to keep the appearance of solvency alive rather than confront the underlying losses directly. Brazil took the most extreme version of this path. By 2015, the situation had become so severe that the Brazilian federal government itself had become the football industry's largest creditor, owed roughly $3 billion in unpaid taxes, prompting the government to pass the Perfut law, allowing clubs to refinance that debt over periods as long as 20 years in exchange for modest compliance reforms. When that proved insufficient, Brazil passed a second law in 2021, allowing clubs to convert from non-profit member associations into for-profit corporate entities called SAFs, specifically to attract foreign investment and let historically insolvent institutions restructure their debt while shielding new investors from decades of accumulated legacy liabilities. And in the United States, Emmels took a completely different approach from all four other examples, rather than let individual club insolvency become a recurring crisis to be managed after the fact. The league eliminated the possibility structurally from the very beginning. Founded in 1996, Emmels operates as a single legal entity that centrally owns every player contract and team franchise in the league, with individual investors simply operating a franchise within a centrally controlled financial system, bound by a league-wide salary cap the league itself enforces. No club can spend itself into the kind of crisis Brazilian or Italian clubs faced, because no club actually controls its own spending independently in the first place. 5 countries. 5 completely different tools: prestige-driven ownership, a legally unbuyable membership structure, accounting fraud eventually caught by regulators, government-brokered debt forgiveness, and outright centralized league control. All 5 arrived at functionally the same outcome: a sport where the normal financial consequences of sustained losses simply don't apply the way they would in almost any other industry. It's worth noting that none of these 5 mechanisms were designed in coordination with each other. English football's prestige ownership era emerged organically as broadcast wealth attracted a new class of buyer. Spain's social structure predates modern football economics entirely, rooted in 19th and early 20th century civic association law that had nothing to do with television money. Brazil's profit law and SAF reform were domestic policy responses to a domestic tax crisis. Mills's single-entity model was a deliberate American legal innovation, built specifically to avoid the antitrust and labor problems that had killed earlier American soccer leagues. Each system solved a different problem in a different decade for different reasons, and yet every single one of them ended up producing an industry where clubs can lose extraordinary sums of money without the conventional consequences a business would otherwise face. Which brings us to the question that actually explains why fans and investors across every one of these different systems keep participating in an arrangement that would look reckless in any other context. If football clubs were valued and supported the way ordinary businesses are, an industry posting these kinds of numbers across 5 separate countries should struggle to retain customers or attract new capital. Instead, valuations keep climbing globally, and 4 psychological forces explain why this holds true regardless of which of the 5 systems described in Part 1 a given club operates under. 1. Inherited, unswitchable identity. Football fandom across every one of these countries is overwhelmingly inherited rather than chosen. Passed down from a parent, tied to a neighborhood, and absorbed in early childhood well before any rational comparison of financial management could take place. A Flamengo supporter in Rio, a Juventus supporter in Turin, and a Manchester City supporter in England are all bound to their club through an identity that predates any conscious evaluation of how well that club is run. There's a well-worn saying inside football culture that captures this precisely: you can change almost anything else about your life more easily than you can change which club you support. This single fact insulates club revenue from financial mismanagement in a way no ordinary business ever benefits from. 2. Owner motivation as a renewable resource. Whether the owner is a Gulf State investment fund, a Socios membership voting to keep an institution alive, or an American private equity fund betting on brand appreciation. The common thread across all 5 systems is that the party ultimately absorbing the loss was rarely seeking a conventional financial return in the first place. A sovereign wealth fund measures success in soft power and global visibility. A social membership measures success in institutional survival and pride. This means the standard mechanism that forces most businesses toward profitability. An investor demanding a return simply doesn't apply with the same force anywhere in this sport. 3. The league-level safety net. Every one of these 5 systems has built some form of structural resilience above the level of any single club. Promotion and relegation ensure the Premier League and Serie A continue, regardless of any individual club's collapse. Brazil's government-brokered debt relief ensures beloved institutions don't simply vanish over unpaid taxes. Mills's single-entity structure means the league itself, rather than any individual investor, absorbs financial shocks centrally. This creates a pervasive, largely justified confidence that the sport as a whole cannot fail. Even when individual clubs are behaving with financial recklessness that would sink almost any other kind of company. 4. The trophy asset mentality. Across every system described in Part 1, owning a major club functions similarly to owning fine art or a private jet, an asset valued for prestige and enjoyment rather than cash flow. Where an annual operating loss gets reframed as the ordinary cost of maintaining an extremely exclusive possession rather than as a business failure requiring correction. Put these 4 forces together, and you get a global sport where the customer base is functionally captive by inherited identity. The capital behind it is largely indifferent to conventional return. Every league has built some form of institutional resilience against individual failure, and the underlying asset is valued for reasons that have nothing to do with financial performance. A combination so consistent across 5 wildly different legal and cultural systems that it starts to look less like a coincidence and more like the actual defining feature of the sport itself. It's worth pausing on how differently these 4 forces manifest depending on which of the 5 systems a fan happens to be inside, even while producing the exact same underlying effect. A Barcelona socio voting in a club election is participating in genuine institutional governance in a way a Manchester City season ticket holder never will, since that club has no membership structure to vote within at all. A Flamengo supporter watching their club navigate government debt relief is experiencing something closer to a national civic drama than a business story. An ML's fan, meanwhile, may not even realize their favorite team doesn't technically own its own best player's contract. The mechanism protecting each fan's club from conventional financial consequences looks completely different depending on which country they're standing in, but the psychological experience of being a fan and the resulting insulation from rational financial comparison ends up remarkably similar everywhere. Let's open the actual books across all 5 systems, because the psychology in Part 2 only makes sense once you see the mechanics protecting it in each one. In England, the numbers are stark on their own. Premier League clubs posted a combined pre-tax loss approaching $948 million in the most recent season, even as revenue hit a record $6.8 billion, with wage costs alone reaching $4.4 billion, roughly 65% of total revenue. Club owners covered the gap by injecting a record $1.66 billion directly into their clubs in a single season, the actual mechanism keeping the league solvent. In Spain, the social structure means clubs like Barcelona can carry debt levels that would trigger a takeover or bankruptcy filing almost anywhere else, while La Liga's centrally enforced spending controls, requiring clubs to register new signings against a calculated spending limit tied to their own finances, function as a regulatory backstop specifically because there's no outside shareholder pressure to provide that discipline internally. In Italy, the ledger reveals something closer to outright manipulation. Juventus's 10-point deduction stemmed from fabricated capital gains booked on player transfers, a technique used across Italian football to convert an unprofitable roster into a paper profit by trading players between clubs at inflated valuations, generating an accounting gain without any real cash economics changing hands underneath it. In Brazil, the numbers reflect the most direct government intervention of any major footballing nation. Roughly $1.3 billion in unpaid taxes owed by clubs to the federal government by 2015, refinanced over periods as long as 20 years under the Profut law, followed by a 2021 reform allowing clubs to convert into corporate SAF entities specifically so foreign capital could absorb historic debt loads that member-run associations had proven structurally unable to manage on their own. In the United States, the ledger looks completely different because the entire risk has been centralized. MLS itself, not any individual club, owns every player contract and absorbs revenue and expenses at the league level before distributing results to investor operators. meaning an individual MLS club simply cannot rack up the kind of independent, club-specific debt crisis that has repeatedly hit Brazilian and Italian football, because it was never given the financial autonomy to do so in the first place. Across all 5 systems, the underlying mechanism is some version of the same trade. Whoever is closest to the actual financial risk, a billionaire owner, a social membership, a national government, or the league itself, has structured the relationship so that conventional insolvency, the kind that would liquidate a normal company, essentially cannot occur. The losses are real. The consequences that would normally follow them in almost any other industry have been engineered away. It's worth comparing this directly against the earlier videos in this series to appreciate how unusual football's position really is. A coffee shop running a 4% margin can be wiped out by one bad month because nobody is standing behind it with a legal or cultural obligation to keep it open regardless of performance. A luxury gym chain can end up refinancing over $1 billion in debt when its underused membership assumption breaks. Football is the one industry examined in this entire series where the loss itself has effectively stopped functioning as a meaningful signal at all. Not because the losses aren't real, but because every single mechanism sitting above the loss across 5 completely different legal and cultural systems has been built specifically to absorb it rather than to correct it. So where does this actually go from here?